what's up guys? Welcome back for part 4, the final part of this epic miter saw station build series. Now, if you happen to miss parts 1 through 3 of this build series, that's okay, I don't judge. Lucky for you, I've got them all linked in the description box below, so you can just go back and start from the beginning and watch this entire build series. But this video is gonna cover the final part of this build series, and as I mentioned in last week's video, that's gonna be tackling adding some sort of dust collection to this miter saw station. Okay, let's get started. One of the main reasons that I held out for so long on making a permanent miter saw station inside the workshop was because of my lack of dust collection. So I knew when I decided to build this miter saw station indoors, I was gonna have to figure out some sort of way to help cut down on the dust that's created when cutting. And miter saws are notorious for creating a lot of dust when cutting. So I've got my work cut out for me, but I think I have a couple of options that are really gonna help me keep the dust under control. Let's get started. Okay, so obviously I'm gonna hook this miter saw up to a vacuum since it's indoors now, and having it hooked up to the vacuum will definitely help out some, but there's definitely some room for improvement. Now, one of the kind of goofy things about this saw, in addition to its pretty large footprint, is this dust collection port here. It's pretty long and pretty far away from where most of the dust is being generated at the blade. And I've never really been able to find a vacuum hose that really fits it very well. I've been able to make some adapters work, but I always end up having to use like tape or something like that. So it does work some, but really, like I said, there's lots of room for improvement. So I knew when I brought this thing indoors, I wanted to sort of make an upgrade that would really hopefully help achieve much better dust collection. And so what I did is I bought one of these little kits from Travis over at Shop Nation. Now he 3D prints these parts that you can add on to your specific miter saw, and they are supposed to like really just help with the dust collection, collecting way more of that dust at the source, sort of replacing this really long dust port here. So I ordered one of these things, and now let's get it installed on the saw and see how it works. To get started, I first had to pull this really inefficient stock dust port off of the miter saw. To do this, I just removed one screw and pulled it out from the back. Next, I had to remove the rear blade guard by removing 2 screws. Now, I do want to hold on to these screws because I'll be replacing them in just a bit. Next, I added this provided vacuum attachment to the dust chute body. Then I attached this rubber flexible flap to the chute body using the provided screws. Next, I removed the screw for the blade guard arm and sort of just set this out of the way for now. I then got the new dust chute body in place and worked on getting it attached to my miter saw using those 2 blade guard screws that I removed earlier. I made sure this was on snug, but you don't want to over tighten, which can risk breaking the plastic. Once it was fully installed, I could go ahead and reattach that blade guard arm. Lastly, I installed a provided vacuum adapter piece to my hose, and it was now ready to accept a vacuum hose. I have to admit, I did a really terrible job of capturing the difference here, but in the first video, I'm making a cut without the vacuum turned on, and it makes a big mess, as you can see. With the second cut, I turned the vacuum on, and I felt like it did a much better job of sort of funneling most of that dust into the vacuum itself. Now, it's not 100% perfect. There's still going to be some dust generated when cutting, but this seems to do a much better job collecting dust than that stock dust port that was on my miter saw. All right guys, we've got that piece installed on the miter saw now. It's ready for a vacuum hose to basically just be connected to it, which means that we need to get a vacuum set up for this system. Now, the vacuum that I'm gonna be using to basically live in this miter saw station is this 4.5 horsepower, 12-gallon shop vac right here. Now this is actually a vacuum that my dad gave to me several years ago. It's kind of just been sitting around the shop because I haven't really been using it. I have another Ridgit vacuum that's a little bit more powerful, and that seems to be the one that I use most of the time. So this is actually perfect because now I finally have something that I can use this shop vac for. I think this one will be powerful enough. We'll see. I'm gonna test it out over the next couple months, and hopefully it'll have plenty power to be able to collect all the dust from this miter saw. Now I could just hook this shop vac up to the miter saw and call it good, but as the whole theme of this part of the video is improving my overall dust collection as best as I can, I'm gonna go a few steps further for this shop vac. One of the first things that I'm going to do to sort of upgrade this shop vac is I'm going to install this HEPA filter. Basically just replace the filter that was in there, which was very full and very clogged, which basically made this thing underperform. Installing this HEPA filter will just make sure that it's really filtering out all of the very fine debris. I think this says that it will filter down to 0.3 microns, and it's 99.97% efficient. So those are pretty good numbers for me. So an easy upgrade that you can make to your shop vac is replacing the filter with one of these HEPA cartridge filters. The second sort of upgrade I'm going to make is installing this Dustopper Pro system to the shop vac itself and connecting that all together. Now, for those that don't know, this is sort of just a dust cyclone separator. It basically will just cyclone the dust and really filter out the really heavy debris from the finer stuff. It just helps improve the overall lifespan of your filters, so that way you don't have to replace them as often. And then a lot of your dust will actually end up in this 5-gallon bucket here rather than in your shop vac, which, like I said, will just end up clogging up your filters over time. So the reason I went with this one in particular, I got this one off of Home Depot's website. And the reason I went with this, I've seen a couple of these dust cyclone separators, but I went with this one because I can just put it on this 5-gallon bucket here, and it's pretty low clearance. Since I'm trying to fit all of this inside of my miter saw station here, I've seen some of the ones like the Oneida one, which is a lot taller. This one's a little lower profile, so I think this will work well. I can basically just hide all of this stuff in my miter saw station under these two sections here, and basically conceal all the hoses and everything. So that's sort of the reason that I went with this one in particular. So now I just need to get this out of the box, get everything connected to my shop vac, get that new HEPA filter installed, and then get this thing hooked up to the miter saw station. And then I have one more thing that I'll show you that I think is going to be a massive upgrade and is really going to help improve the dust collection overall. I'll show you that in just a bit.
Now, when I was getting this Dustopper Pro set up, I did notice that the instructions for this thing recommended using 5 horsepower vacuums and above in combination with this. Now, my vacuum is only 4.5 horsepower, so I'm curious to see if it will be powerful enough. I'm hopeful that it's close enough, but I'll test this thing out over the next few months and see if I notice a reduction in suction power. Next, I took a hole saw and drilled a couple of holes in this wooden top so that I could pass my vacuum hose and power cord through. I also installed a couple of grommets to those holes as well for a bit of a cleaner look.
All right guys, things are moving along pretty well. I've got this piece attached to my vacuum to help improve that dust collection. I've got my vacuum hose plugged into that, and then I just ran my vacuum hose through this wood piece here, through these little grommets that I installed. I've got my vacuum hose and my power cord running through this piece into this cavity under here. Now it's time to get that vacuum and Dustopper Pro to live in here permanently, but we have one pretty big problem that we need to solve before we can do that. See, the thing is I built this miter saw station in this section here, and there's no power. So that's a pretty big problem that we're going to have to solve. And actually a lot of the walls that I have in this garage space that are unfinished have no outlets on them either. So even if I would have had this thing up against a wall, I still would have had to add some sort of outlets for power for this thing. So eventually I want to come in and add outlets to those walls, but that's a project for another day. How I'm gonna solve the power issue for this miter saw station for now is there is an outlet behind me here, and the plan is that I'm just going to run an extension cord into that outlet and then have it run behind the tool chest on the floor, and then I'll just drill a hole where it can come into this cavity here, so that I can plug the vacuum up to it as well as the saw. And one of those things that I mentioned, the final thing that is really gonna help with the dust collection for this miter saw station is by plugging it all into this thing here. Now this is called the Ortis vacuum switch. And basically what this thing does is it allows you to plug your miter saw into it, or table saw, sander, router, whatever. And then you can plug your vacuum into it as well. And you can set it on auto, so that way every time you power on one of those tools, so in this case every time I go to use the miter saw, which is plugged in, it'll automatically turn on the vacuum and run the vacuum. And then I think it will even run for like a couple seconds after you're done cutting, just to go ahead and clean out that lines. Now this is going to be extremely helpful because I can't tell you the amount of times that I go to make a cut and forget to turn the vacuum on, and then there's just dust everywhere. So that's a pretty big thing that I tend to forget. So this is going to help a lot because it's gonna make sure that every time I'm cutting, that vacuum is also running to collect that extra dust. And now I didn't really mention it, but the last sort of dust collection thing that I have for this workshop is I do have this air filter above me, and I tend to run that thing quite a bit while I'm down here working. Now, especially since I plan to do some cutting indoors, pretty much every time that I'm cutting on the miter saw, I'll turn this air filter on, and that way most of that fine dust that's in the air can be caught by this air filter. Now, I didn't exactly plan this out, but it actually ends up working perfectly, that this thing sits literally right above where the cutting is happening. So my hope is that if any extra dust gets into the air, this thing will catch all that fine dust so that I'm not breathing that in. So that'll be hopefully really helpful thing to have. Now, I will probably also eventually build some sort of dust hood to cover up this section here. For now, I'm just gonna leave it as is, and honestly, the reason for that is because I have run out of plywood, and I don't wanna go buy more plywood just to build this little dust shroud for this miter saw. So whenever I get some more scrap plywood, I will probably build something just to basically box this thing off, and again catch and contain like any of that excess dust and just kind of keep it from getting into the air. So those are pretty much all of the plans that I have for dust collection for this miter saw station. There's always probably going to be room for improvement, but that's sort of something that I can tackle as I go, as I use this thing and I figure out areas that I can improve upon. All right, let's go ahead and work on getting that power attached to this section under here, and then we can officially call this thing done.
I started by running this extension cord behind my husband's tool chest that I'm pretty sure he hasn't cleaned off in over a century. So this was a bit of a challenge. What made it even more challenging is that I ended up buying an extension cord that was like 5 times longer than I actually needed. Not sure why I did that. Anyways, once the cord was run behind the tool chest, I just used a cord cover to run it on the floor and applied a lot of duct tape to hold it down. It's not exactly the prettiest solution, but I think it will get the job done. Next, I just drilled a hole in the side of my cabinet where the vacuum will live so that I can run the world's longest extension cord through. Lastly, I got that Ortis vacuum switch mounted, plugged in both my miter saw and vacuum, and then switched it to auto. Now when I turn my saw on, the vacuum will automatically turn on and then run for an additional 10 seconds to clean the line. And all that was left now was to get the vacuum system in place inside of the miter saw cabinet. And with that, I can proudly announce that this miter saw station is complete.
All right, guys, that is a wrap on this miter saw station. Now, I've literally been dreaming of building this thing for a very long time. Basically, every single day that I would have to haul this thing in and outside a bunch of times and really kind of kill my back at the end of the day, I would think to myself how nice it would be to be able to set this thing up inside and not have to take it in and out all day. And I'm happy to report that I don't have to do that anymore. And I am so happy about that. Not only that, I am really happy with the way that this thing turned out. Now, I know this setup would not work for everybody since it is a little bit bigger than some miter saw stations that you see. And I did that, like I mentioned earlier in the video, to basically accommodate this saw in particular, rather than having to go out and upgrade. Now, I'm able to basically put this in the center of the room because I have the space, and so I just went with it. I just built a massive set of cabinets with storage on both sides. I actually have so much storage now that I don't even have enough stuff to put in all of the drawers. So I filled up a couple of them and then I left a couple of them empty. If I know anything about myself, I'll probably be purchasing more tools and things for this workshop in the future. So now I've got a place to put them. Not only that, I've got a couple of work areas now since I went with this fenceless stop block system. All I have to do is just slide these stop blocks out, and now I have a pretty large, nice area that I can work on. If I need somewhere that I can set up stuff to, have somewhere to paint or just all different uses. I mean, you can never have enough work surfaces in a workshop. I also now have a new home for one of my newest tools, which is this Craig Foreman pocket hole cutting machine. I like having a place where it's just going to be stationary and it's not something that I've got to tuck away and then pull out when I need it. Now it has a home where I can do pocket hole cutting, which is something that I do quite a bit. So having these work surfaces are going to be really handy. And in addition to all of that, I just think it looks cool. It's going to be a really big focal point for my workshop. It's something that I kind of just made it my own. I added my logo and some other designs through using vinyl, and I just made it something that makes me happy. So that way when I come in here every single day and I look at it, it's something I'm proud of and it's something that I think looks really nice. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed following me along on this build. I had a lot of fun making this. I hope you had a lot of fun watching it. If you want to see what I build next using this miter saw station, then you better go ahead and get subscribed. I got a lot of things in the works now that I've finally done with this. A lot of builds coming up, so go ahead and get subscribed so you don't miss it. I've got all of the tools linked that I used in this video. If you want to check any of those out, I'll leave all of those linked in the description box below. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you for my next build.